I set my wine glass down very carefully, the way you do when your hands aren't entirely steady and you don't want anyone to notice. My brother's girlfriend had just called my job basically data entry with a fancier title, and everyone at the table, my mom, my dad, my aunt, my brother, they all laughed, not nervously, not politely. They laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all evening. I smiled. I kept smiling for the next 40 minutes, and I didn't say a word. I want to tell you something about being the quiet one in a loud family. People think it means you don't notice things. They think silence is the same as obliviousness, that if you're not fighting back, you must not be bothered. What it actually means, what it meant for me for 31 years, is that you notice everything. You just learned early that no one was going to believe you anyway. My brother and I grew up in a 3-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio. He was the talker. Varsity baseball class president, the kind of kid who made adults feel immediately comfortable. Teachers loved him. Neighbors loved him. My parents lit up differently when he walked into a room, and I'm not saying that to be cruel. I think they probably didn't even know they were doing it. He was just easier to love out loud. I was the one who got good grades quietly and read books in her room and didn't require much maintenance, and I think somewhere along the way that got translated into, she doesn't require much attention either. I became a forensic accountant. I know, not exactly a conversation starter at dinner parties. When people ask what I do and I tell them, their eyes do this thing where they're trying to find a polite way to change the subject. I've gotten used to it. What most people don't realize is that forensic accounting is essentially financial detective work. I find fraud. I find embezzlement. I find the money people think they've hidden. I've testified as an expert witness in federal court 4 times. I've helped put 3 people in prison. But at family dinners, I'm just the one who does spreadsheets. My brother started dating Kelsey about 8 months before all of this happened. She was 34, ran what she described as a boutique investment consulting firm, and had opinions about everything delivered with a confidence that I recognized immediately as the kind that doesn't have much underneath it. She wore the right things. She said the right words. She knew how to make my mother feel included in a conversation while simultaneously steering it wherever she wanted it to go. My family loved her instantly. I didn't dislike her, not at first. I was careful about that. I've been the odd one out enough times to know that sometimes you're reading hostility where there's only nervousness, and I gave her every benefit of the doubt I had. But there were small things. The way she'd ask about my work with this faint smile, like she was humoring a child explaining a drawing. The way she'd redirect conversations about my promotions or cases toward her own projects. The way she'd say, "Oh, that must be so steady," when my career came up with that particular emphasis on steady. That meant boring, that meant safe, that meant not impressive. I noticed, I filed it away, I said nothing. The dinner happened on a Saturday in March. My parents' house, long table in the dining room, the good dishes out because Kelsey was there. My aunt and uncle had driven up from Cincinnati, my cousin and his wife, 8 people total. My mother had made her pot roast, which she only does for occasions she considers significant. And I remember thinking as I helped set the table that she'd never once made pot roast when I'd come home with news about a case or a promotion. She'd made it the first time Kelsey came to dinner. Things were fine through the salad course. Normal family conversation. My uncle's back surgery, my cousin's new house, whether my parents were going to sell or stay when they eventually retired. I was sitting across from Kelsey and 2 seats down from my brother, who was in the middle of a long story about a fishing trip that I had already heard twice. Then the topic of work came up. It usually does. Kelsey talked about a client she was advising. Something about restructuring a portfolio, a lot of terminology dropped in a casual way that implied the listener should already know what it meant. My brother looked proud. My mother nodded along. My dad asked a follow-up question that showed he'd understood maybe a third of it. Then my aunt turned to me. "And how about you, honey? How's the accounting world treating you?" I started to answer. I said something about a case I'd been working on. I kept it vague, the way I always do, because I can't discuss active investigations, but I mentioned it had involved tracing funds through a series of shell companies, and that we'd finally gotten enough documentation to hand off to the DA's office. Kelsey set her fork down. "Shell companies," she repeated, with this little tilt of her head. "That sounds very TV drama." I looked at her. "It's pretty routine, actually. I'm sure it is." She smiled at my brother. "No offense, but forensic accounting always sounds like something they made up to make auditing seem more exciting." She glanced around the table like she was inviting everyone in. Like someone decided regular accounting wasn't glamorous enough, so they added forensic to the title. My brother laughed first. Then my dad. My uncle made a sound that was approximately a chuckle. My mom said, "Kelsey," in the tone she uses when she thinks something is a little mean but also a little funny. My cousin's wife looked at her plate. "I felt it the way you feel a temperature drop. Sudden, total, spreading from your chest outward. I mean," Kelsey continued, warming to the audience, "what does a forensic accountant actually do all day? Like, really? Isn't it just looking at spreadsheets and hoping you find something interesting? Not exactly, I said. She's being modest, but in a way that meant let it go, not in a way that meant actually defend her. I'm sure it pays well, Kelsey said, in the tone of someone complimenting a child's participation ribbon. Stability is so important, not everyone needs to be doing high-stakes work. There it was. Neat and clean and wrapped in plausible deniability the way a skilled person does it. Not everyone needs to be doing high-stakes work. Said to a forensic accountant who had spent the previous 6 months on a case involving $11 million in fraudulent wire transfers. I looked at her. I looked at my brother who was refilling his wine. I looked at my dad who was cutting his pot roast. My mom was asking my aunt something about her garden. No one was looking at me. I picked up my own fork. I took a bite. I chewed slowly and thought about something I had looked up 3 weeks earlier, late on a Tuesday night, because something about Kelsey had snagged in the back of my mind and I'd learned a long time ago to pay attention to that feeling. I thought about what I'd found. I set it aside. I decided to wait. This is the thing about the kind of work I do. You don't move until you have everything. You wait until the picture is complete. Rushing costs you the case. Patience is the whole job. So I waited through the rest of dinner. I made conversation with my cousin's wife about her garden. She had just started growing tomatoes, and I helped my mother carry dishes to the kitchen, and I listened to Kelsey hold court at the table about her philosophy on wealth building, which involved a lot of statements like most people just don't understand leverage, and the ultra-wealthy don't think about money the way regular people do. My dad was nodding. He has worked the same manufacturing job for 30 years. He nodded like she was a prophet. We moved to the living room for coffee. My aunt brought out a coffee cake she'd made. Things got looser, chattier. My brother sat next to Kelsey on the couch, and at some point the conversation circled back to work, because it always does in my family, and Kelsey mentioned that she was in the process of closing a significant deal for a new client. A retired couple she'd met through a referral, she said, who were looking to move their retirement savings into higher-yield vehicles. I went very still. Retired couple, I said, and my voice came out completely even. What kind of vehicles? She waved a hand. Private placements, mostly. Alternative assets. The kind of returns you can't get in a standard Roth. Are they accredited investors? She looked at me. Something shifted in her expression. Not much, just a millimeter. Of course. And your firm is registered with the SEC? The room got quiet. Not dramatically. Just that particular quiet that happens when a conversation takes an unexpected turn and everyone senses it. We operate under an exemption, she said. The confidence was still there, but it had a different texture now. The way ice sounds different when it's starting to crack. It's completely standard for boutique firms at our level. I nodded slowly. I set down my coffee cup. I reached into my bag. I'd kept it next to the armchair instead of leaving it in the entryway like I usually would because I'm a planner. And I took out my phone. I'm sure it is, I said. Can I ask, is the firm name Kelsey Vance Consulting Group, or did you change the name after 2021? She stared at me. Because I found a DBA registration in your name from 2019, a cease and desist letter from Ohio's Division of Securities in 2021, and a civil complaint filed by a couple in Worthington who said they lost $180,000 through what they described as a Regulation D offering that was never properly disclosed. I looked up from my phone. The case was settled out of court, which is probably why it didn't come up immediately, but it's in the public record. The room had gone completely silent. My brother was looking at Kelsey. My dad had put down his coffee. My mom had one hand over her mouth. Kelsey said, That's not what it sounds like. That was a misunderstanding with a client who... The Worthington couple's names were in the complaint, I said. They were 67 and 71 years old. Their combined retirement savings at the time of the complaint were roughly $400,000. I paused. You mentioned your current clients are retired. I wasn't angry. This is the thing that I think surprised people in that room most. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't doing any of the things you'd expect from someone who'd just spent 3 hours being condescended to. I was simply the same person I always am at work, clear, thorough, dispassionate. I'm not accusing you of anything, I said, so asking questions, the same questions a regulator would ask, and I'm noting that the answers you're giving right now are the same kind of answers that tend to precede someone getting badly hurt. My brother stood up. Kelsey, do you want to? She should answer the question, my dad said. I looked at my dad. In 31 years, I could count on one hand the number of times he had interrupted my brother to side with me. He wasn't looking at me, though. He was looking at Kelsey, and his face was doing something I hadn't seen before, a kind of hard assessment, the look of a man who has worked his whole life and knows what it means to lose retirement savings. Kelsey left 20 minutes later. She said she had an early morning. She kissed my brother on the cheek. She didn't say anything to me on her way out, but she looked at me once, briefly, and I think she understood something had just fundamentally changed. My brother followed to the door. I heard them talking quietly in the entryway for a few minutes and then he came back alone. He stood in the living room doorway and looked at me. "You couldn't have said something privately," he said. "You had to do it like that in front of everyone?" I thought about that question for a moment. It was a fair question in some ways. It was also the same question that gets asked of people who report things, who speak up, who produce the documentation instead of keeping it quiet to preserve the comfort of the room. "Your girlfriend mocked my career in front of our entire family tonight," I said. I smiled and let it go. And then she mentioned she was about to move a retired couple's savings into private placements without mentioning a civil complaint from the last time she did that. I held his gaze. "Which part would you have wanted me to handle privately?" He didn't have an answer. He left an hour later. My mom walked me to my car when it was time to go. The night was cold, that particular mid-March cold that feels like winter making one last argument. She stood with her arms crossed over her chest and didn't say anything for a moment. "I didn't know," she finally said. "I know. I should have." She stopped, started over. "When she said that about your job, I should have said something." I looked at her. I thought about all the versions of that sentence, all the years and dinners and conversations where something similar should have been said and wasn't. I thought about the pot roast. "Yeah," I said, "you should have." She nodded. She didn't try to explain it away. I think that was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. I drove home on 270, the highway quiet at that hour, the city lights low and spread out on either side. I had the heat on and some low music playing and I let myself feel, finally what I hadn't let myself feel all evening, the humiliation of that moment at the dinner table, my father laughing, my brother not looking up, the way the room had swallowed it and moved on like it was nothing, like I was nothing. I let myself feel it, and then I let it go. Not the forgiving kind of letting go, I want to be clear about that. I'm not a person who believes humiliation should be quietly metabolized and forgotten in the name of family harmony. What I mean is that I put it in the right place, filed, documented, given its proper weight and no more. My brother called me 2 weeks later. He'd done some of his own looking into things after that night. He didn't find anything I hadn't already found, but I think the act of finding it himself mattered to him in a way it wouldn't have if he'd just taken my word for it. He said he'd ended things with Kelsey. He said he was sorry. He said it twice, which for my brother is essentially a written affidavit. I told him I appreciated that. I didn't tell him it would have meant more 8 months earlier, when I first got that feeling. I didn't tell him about the Tuesday night I spent cross-referencing public records because something in my gut said to look. I didn't tell him what it cost me to sit at that table and smile while my family laughed. He knows, I think. On some level he knows. The retired couple in Worthington, I looked them up in the weeks after, just to see. Their complaint had been settled, which means they got something back, but settled usually means not everything. I hope they're okay. I hope whoever Kelsey went to next either asked harder questions or found someone at their own dinner table who would. I've thought a lot about what my aunt said to me the following week when she called to check in. She said, "You were so calm." How were you so calm? I didn't know how to explain that calm isn't the absence of feeling. It's what you build over years of being underestimated, of being the one who notices things no one else bothers to notice, of learning that the most powerful thing you can do in a room that's written you off is simply to know more than everyone in it. I wasn't performing calm. I was just doing my job. That's all I've ever done. Quietly, steadily, without much fanfare, I do my job, and I've learned that when the moment comes, that's usually enough.